yes, having a franchise quarterback is important. Because at the end of the day, you have two types of teams in the NFL: those that have a quarterback and those that don't. And primarily, the teams that contend for championships have a quarterback. That's just the way it is. That's the modern reality of the National Football League. I don't think anybody really questions that or disputes this. Now, you look at the Atlanta Falcons, they have a franchise quarterback in Matt Ryan. They're in that category of being the team that has a quarterback. However, when you can't consistently run the ball, you can't consistently protect your quarterback, therefore putting your quarterback under a lot of pressure, therefore forcing him, because you can't run the ball, to throw the ball too much, and then at times force some rushed and bad decisions, and couple that with a defense that really can't consistently stop anybody. It shouldn't be any surprise that the Atlanta Falcons have kind of bottomed out a little bit over the past 2 years, and Mike Smith was ultimately sent packing. You're a defensive-minded guy, and your defenses continue to suck. It's not a surprise that you're gone. So the Atlanta Falcons decided to bring in somebody that was more successful as a coordinator in Dan Quinn. He was their guy from the beginning of the process. They stuck with it all the way through to the Super Bowl and ultimately decided that's the guy, that's who they're going to build around. They want to build a Seahawks type of organization in Atlanta. And I understand to some degree it makes sense. And you look in the offseason, they cut Sam Baker, which is not necessarily a huge loss. They got rid of Steven Jackson, which again wasn't really a huge loss. But they really didn't get all that particularly active in free agency either. They had kind of gotten active in free agency the season before, and I don't really think it paid off all that particularly well. I think the Atlanta Falcons organization kind of realizes that they're going to have to build through the draft, which is kind of interesting because you're talking about a Matt Ryan who's already close to pushing 30 now. So how much time do you really have with him as the man at the helm? So they need to get it right, and they need to get it right in a big way. And you could kind of see, to me, in a way, the identity that Dan Quinn wants to bring to Atlanta from Seattle play out in the NFL draft. Drafting a guy like Vic Beasley with the 8th overall pick, maybe somebody that he envisions as a Chris Clemens or Bruce Irvin type of outside pass rusher. Then in round 2, a big physical corner with speed like a Jalen Collins, maybe looking at what he had in Seattle with guys like Richard Sherman, and he wants to see those big physical corners that can run and see them in Atlanta, and pairing him alongside of a Desmond Trufant. You look at round 3 with the selection of Tevin Coleman, understanding that they need a young potential 3-down running back similar to what Seattle's had for the past several years in beast mode, Marshawn Lynch. And I thought the Falcons had a really good draft. Even when you look at the drafting of Justin Hardy and Grady Jarrett, it was a really solid draft for the Atlanta Falcons, and a lot of pieces that I expect to contribute both right away and potentially long term. Now, in terms of the Falcons' strengths for this 2015 campaign, you got to start off with Matt Ryan. I know some people like to knock him, some people like to shit on him, but a lot of these people like to knock on him and shit on him are fans of a team with a quarterback that is worse than him. Matt Ryan is still a franchise NFL quarterback. And again, the Falcons are one of those teams that fit into this category. They have one. It's a great place to start. So when you have it, it's obviously one of the biggest strengths, if not the biggest strength that you have. But then you got to look at the wide receiving core too. I mean, you've got Julio Jones. You've got Roddy White. You've got Devin Hester in the way that they deploy him. They utilize him very well in Atlanta, and I expect him to do so again this year. And then you look at, even though they lost Harry Douglas, they drafted a guy like Justin Hardy, a really, really solid football player that's going to be able to find ways to get open and consistently catch the football at the NFL level, in my humble opinion. While they don't necessarily have a ton at tight end, they've got so much on the outside at wide receiver that maybe it doesn't matter as much. And then you look on the defensive side of the ball, Desmond Trufant is an absolute stud, in my opinion, one of the top 5 corners in the National Football League. And as a result, when you have that type of corner out there on the outside that you can match up against opposing teams' number 1 wide receivers, it could definitely help out the rest of the defense. But I have some major concerns for this Falcons team going forward into this year. First, their offensive line. So many of the problems they had as a team can really be attributed to that offensive line. Sure, we could talk about the running game, and I will be talking about that in a second. But the fact is their running game wasn't very good because their offensive line wasn't very good. and in particular, they weren't all that good in pass protection, especially once injury started to hit that unit in 2014. Matt Ryan was under a lot of pressure consistently, which led to him forcing a lot of throws and rushing decisions and making bad decisions at times, and it really hurt the Atlanta Falcons. They lacked balance on offense, they got very one-dimensional, and they made some very bad mistakes. And another reason for that, along with the offensive line, is their lack of clear-cut, consistent running game. This is a team that could really benefit from having a running game that could take the pressure off of Matt Ryan, therefore also opening up things on the outside for Julio Jones and Roddy White, Devin Hester, and Justin Hardy, but also a running game that could control the clock, establish a physical identity, and keep the defense off the field, because this Atlanta Falcons defense is not that particularly good. I mean, that whole unit, frankly, is one big concern. So this Falcons team really needs that running game in some ways to do what that running game did for the Dallas Cowboys in 2014. Now, granted, the Cowboys had invested a lot in their offensive line with 3 former first-round picks in Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, and Travis Frederick, and the Falcons basically have Jake Matthews. But with that said, you could see where if the Falcons could establish that type of identity, it could help them on both sides of the ball. But in terms of defense, I have concerns about everything. I wonder where their pass rush is going to come from. I'm not that particularly high on their linebacking unit with Warlow and Durant. And then I look at their secondary. I'm not that sold on their safeties. I have concerns about the corners after Desmond Trufant. A lot of issues and a lot of questions there. In terms of players to watch for this season, I'll start off with their third-round pick, Tevin Coleman. They need him to be that feature back. They need him to be that three-down guy. He reminds me quite a bit of DeMarco Murray. They need him to be a DeMarco Murray type of back. And if he could be at least somewhat a DeMarco Murray type of back, he doesn't have to put up those type of 2014 DeMarco Murray numbers, but he needs to be that guy that can become that featured back, because it will help out so much of everything the Falcons want to do on both sides of the ball. Keep the defense off the field. It will sit there and help the Falcons control the time of possession. It will take pressure off of the receivers on the outside. It will help the offensive line, and most importantly of all, it will help Matt Ryan. It benefits everybody. But other players to watch, I look at 2013 second-round pick Robert Alford. With Jalen Collins in the mix, they need a guy like Alford to be able to hold him off for a starting spot as long as possible. They need Alford to become better opposite Desmond Trufant. Otherwise, he's just going to get picked on all the time. And then I look at this year's first-round pick, Vic Beasley. The Falcons really badly, desperately need Vic Beasley to be that Chris Clemens, Bruce Irvin type of edge rusher in Atlanta, similar to what Dan Quinn had in Seattle. They need Vic Beasley to play like a top 10 pick out of the gates. They need him to be that impact edge rusher that they flat out just don't have on that roster right now. In terms of the Falcons schedule for 2015, I've got a few different blocks that I'm paying attention to. Weeks 1 through 3, you look at it, they've got that NFC East swing. They've got to host Philadelphia, then they travel to New York and to Dallas. If the Falcons want to sit there and entertain a thought of bouncing back a bit this year and potentially getting into the playoff mix, they got to find a way to go 2-1 in those first 3 games. If they go 1-3 or 1-2 or 0-3, in those first 3 games, you can pretty much forget it. You know this is going to be a 6-10 type of year. If they can sit there and go 2-1 in those first 3 games, then that sets them up well and gives them hope, builds a positive momentum heading into the rest of the first half of the season, especially when you look at weeks 5 through 9. They're all potentially winnable games. They host Washington, go to New Orleans, go to Tennessee, host Tampa Bay, go to San Francisco. While 3 of those 5 games that I just mentioned are all on the road, again, those are all potentially winnable games. And when you look at it, if you sit there and say, winnable games, the only team that arguably has a better quarterback than the Atlanta Falcons in that 5-week stretch would be the New Orleans Saints with Drew Brees, but the New Orleans Saints might be a worse team than the Atlanta Falcons. So there's a potential there with Matt Ryan and that offense. If they can keep the defense off the field some and limit some of their mistakes on offense, this is a team that could really make some hay there in the first half of the schedule. So you're talking about, again, like I'm saying here, 2-1 in their first 3 games. If they can find a way to do that and then maybe go 4-1 in that 5-week stretch there, they're sitting really pretty heading into the second half of the season. But then there's also that stretch of games week 13 through 15 where they've got 3 straight on the road. You've got to go to Tampa, to Carolina, and to Jacksonville. Now, granted, 2 of those 3 teams are potentially beatable, but going to Tampa, whereas Jameis Winston might have potentially had 3 quarters of the season to progress and get better. Then you're going to Carolina, a team who may end up being the number 1 overall seed in the NFC playoff picture. And then you're going to Jacksonville. Those are 3 straight road games late in the year. That's a brutal stretch, again, for a team that doesn't particularly play that well on grass and play well outside, a reflection of Matt Ryan. They've got 3 straight outdoor games on grass. Not a good thing to have late in the year. I really think in terms of this team, it's going to be one of those situations similar to like a reference with the Chicago Bears. They could be better. They could be play better, they could be coached better, but it might not necessarily reflect in the record. Yeah, I mean, again, this is a team that could, in theory, sit there and win 9 games. I think that'd be very generous to sit there and say they could, but I do think this is also a team that could only win 4 or 5 games because I still have concerns about a lot of areas on that defensive side of the ball. I still really have concerns about their offensive line, and I have concerns about their running game. Those are a lot of questions to have to expect a team to be able to make it to the playoffs this year. I really think offensive balance is going to be key. Yes, they need that offensive line to block better, but they really need somebody in that running game to step up and provide that consistent presence because it's going to help so many aspects of the team, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. If they can get more offensive balance, if they can get a guy to be that consistent feature back or find a tandem of guys that could be a consistent presence out of the backfield on the ground, then this is a Falcons team that could potentially win 7 or 8 games. But again, I think for the Atlanta Falcons, it's about seeing improvements on the defensive side of the ball, improvements in the balance on the offensive side of the ball, improvements in the offensive line, more than it is the win-loss record in 2015.